All right, now why should you want to know how to create contracts on your own rather than using the contracts that you can buy, beg, borrow, or steal? Because you can control what you offer. You can control the whole ambience of the contract. And by the way, what do? We usually call these agreements when we're with the sellers. We call them agreements rather than contracts to ease that, because who wants to sign a contract, but who wants to sign an agreement? It's a little easier to sign an agreement. So you want to simplify. In my experience, because I purchase from sellers mostly, directly from sellers, I want to simplify the agreement that has the least amount of clauses, but at least something that I can get out of it. If I really, really want it bad, I won't have any escape clause. But I also want you to be able to understand other contracts as well. So as we're going through this, you might be looking at it and saying, oh, I need to look for these 5 parts in a contract. You also want to lock down the opportunity fast when you're working with a seller. Be able to write it up in something like I'm doing, that I'm going to show. You can always add an addendum to it if they really want to, if they're motivated and want to sell. And like I said, this puts the seller at ease. There are some basic parts of a real estate contract. You've got, first of all, who, the parties, you know, you got the who, and then you got the what, which is the legal description. And you have the how much and how you're going to do it. And then there's the earnest money, and I don't have a W word for that. And sign it. And then, like I said, you can add addendums. So I'm going to go through each of these parts of the real estate contract one at a time, and we'll get started here. The parties and the date. I also want to mention the date because I didn't mention that earlier as part of the agreement, but it might be good to have a date on it. The party section of the contract will typically contain information for both the buyer and the seller. And if you are buying, if you're buying through an entity, if you look at the buyer there, you want your company name, your organization type, and or assigns. So it took me, like, when I got started in real estate, people would say and or assigns so fast that I never knew what they were saying. So I'm writing it out right there, and or assigns. So for example, Grateful Nuts Homes, that's my company, a limited liability company, that's an LLC in the state of Oregon, and or assigns. That's how I write my agreements. If the property is still owned by, if the property happens to be owned by an estate, then you're going to want to, for the seller information, you're going to want to know that kind of stuff. So you have a private party, you can put their names. If it's a trust, you're going to put the trust. If it's an estate, you write estate of and the name of the deceased person. And sometimes you might be dealing with a power of an attorney, power of attorney, and write that person's name with POA or attorney in fact for the seller. Simple stuff, and I prefer to put the date at the top of the agreement because it helps me keep track of them better. But I've seen many that do it at the very end of the agreement. I like to put on this date, such and such. All right, now we're going to the how, so or the what. That's interesting. So the purchase price, you're going to put down how much you're going to actually pay, all in all. Earnest money, how much you're putting down, and cash to the seller at closing. Okay, that's if it's a whole cash deal and you're not writing any lending on it. Otherwise, you might have seller financing in there. You might have subject to a new loan and subject to the current mortgages that you're going to take over. So subject to might be 2 mortgages. So you might have a first and a second that you're going to take over. So that's under seller financing. Although this section may seem fairly obvious, I've heard some stories where both investors and real estate agents fill it out incorrectly. I myself have filled it out incorrectly. Typically, this section will be broken into two parts, one for the cash portion of the sales and another for the finance portion, like I put it up here. If you're doing an all cash offer, put the sum total sales price at the top, and then put 0 for any of the financing. So if you have financing on your agreement, you just put 0, 0, 0, like in all those 4 examples. And the other thing about this, it looks, you know, just the psychological reason for having the financing part on there and you're putting 0, 0, 0, that makes the seller feel happy, basically, because you're not financing, they're not giving you seller financing. So if you happen to be paying cash and you're putting zeros for the rest of it, and then you put the total price back down there, which is the purchase price, then it really is a good psychological thing for the seller. Now we're going on to the what, which is the legal description. So the legal description and the address. I've seen many sales do it without the address, but this is not a recorded document. First of all, your sales agreement is not a your purchase and sales agreement is not a recorded document. So it's fine to have the address on there. It's when you go to the deed that gets recorded. So if you want to put the copy the legal description, you can find sources that you can get the legal description either from a previous deed, a deed of trust, or other mortgage documents. I use RLID, which is regional land something database. I forget. And I'm able to get onto there to get those kind of descriptions from those other documents. This is an example of the last deal I did here, which the Lane County real property map is, that's how the legal description starts. You can also put in the place where it says, where you might put on your agreement legal description, you could say, see attached. And what will happen then is the escrow agent, title company, will attach the legal description to the back side, you know, the last page of your agreement, and take care of it, and you don't even have to worry about it. So it's not a big deal. I also put address commonly known as, and for that legal description, it was this address here, 92228 Queen Street in Marcola. And so that would be as something you would usually write, address commonly known as, and put that in. I think I found chat. Okay, I found the chat box, everybody. All right. All right, next is the earnest money part of the agreement, and that's typically something you need to have on your real estate agreement, or your escrow agent's going to ask you about it. Typically, it's 1% of the sale is your earnest money. It can be, you know, you can hear from the gurus in Florida that will say it's $10. Well, we're not in Florida. So I'm just saying, for Oregon, our escrow companies are expecting at least somewhere around 1%, 5%, 0.5% might get you through, but whatever you put down, it shows how serious you are as a buyer to that seller. And also your earnest money, you need to look at it as something that you could lose if you don't close. Should you not have some of those things that Scott's going to talk about, which are the clauses. And then the last thing we have are the signatures. The seller signature, you need a signature from all parties that are on the deed. I had a flip that I did last year where the person that was on the deed was the grandson of the actual owner. Well, she considered herself the owner, the grandma, but she changed it over to her grandson's name for who knows why, fear, whatever. And she thought she was going to die, so she just wanted to take care of that situation, so it just automatically go to an heir. So I had to get the signature from the grandson, you know, who was in high school, seriously, high school in Sweet Home. The buyer's signature, of course, that's you. And if you're more than one in your company or a spouse situation, of course, you need to sign. Both of you need to sign. That is all you need for a real estate agreement. Are there any questions? Oh, thank you, Brad, for RLID, Regional Land Information Database. It's like, what's the I? It's not real estate. Addendums, I want to mention, so your contract is not set in stone. If something should rise up, you can add an addendum. And this last one, which I did the example of Sweet Home, was not Sweet Home, Marcola, the Marcola one, which was last month. The flood zone, it turned out that it was in a really risky flood zone. And so, Daryl, you're gonna need to mute yourself.
Hey, I was gonna suggest you mute me and let me just listen to the meeting.
I'm gonna try to mute you.
Okay,
if I can
thanks.
find that page if you can't mute yourself.
It's not giving me a page. I'm not on I can't watch you guys.
Okay.
But I can mute. Maybe I can.
You're gone. I muted you. All right, back again. All right. Welcome, Daryl. Better late than never, okay? So no agreement is set in stone. You can add an addendum. Like I was saying, the flood zone, it was in a flood zone. It was in the worst flood zone rating of all. And so we had to go back to I had to go back to the seller, which this is actually the first time I've ever gone back to the seller and changed my offer price and got her to lower it $30,000. So it ended up being a win. She didn't mind lowering it $30,000. She still got what she needed out of the deal. And I felt bad about it, but I then sold the deal to someone else who's now flipping that property and is very happy to be doing that. And the lender was very happy at the low price due to that addendum. I also want to mention, this is something that most people don't know, and this I really want to mention this for a particular reason, but addendums to your contract override anything else that's previously said. I particularly look for this in my lender agreements. When I'm getting an agreement from a hard money lender and see addendums, then I realize that that is negating anything else that was said previously. So if it said in the original contract that it was a 12-month payoff, and then in the addendum it says it's a 6-month and there will be penalty and you have to apply again or whatever, then realize that that page in the addendum is overriding whatever was said previously in the full-fledged looking nice agreement. All right, I think that's it for me. That's all I have. And I'm going to go back to you all.
So, question, Grace?
Yeah, I see you say. Go ahead. Oh, yeah.
So what you're saying is the addendum could be addressing one thing, but it also has other terms in there, and if you're not paying attention to everything that's written there, you might get something slipped by you that you were only looking for the one detail that you thought it was changing, and other details could be getting changed at the same time.
It could be. And
Okay.
so this was my first flip that I already knew that about addendums, and I saw that on the contract. So why would somebody send me a contract with 3 addendums on it initially? I mean, it's not like it was added on later, but it was initially put on that way. So it was, and so I blew a gasket basically. and then they
yeah, that kind of throws up a red flag if it comes with 3 addenda and you haven't even signed the first agreement.
Right. And so I took it to an attorney who said, yes, I was right, and this is what it means. And so I went back to the lender, and it was actually a salesperson who had to go back to the principal on that and say, hey, what's going on with this, blah, blah, blah. And so, and they ended up taking that addendum off. So it was good. But yeah, that's something you really want to know about contracts, and know that as well about when you're doing addendums. You wrote, yeah, all the buyers, if the company, like you're a company, an LLC with a partnership, one managing partner can sign. You don't have to have both sign. It's going to go into your name, I mean, your company name, or if you're a husband and wife that are purchasing a property and only the husband signs, then that's fine too, because you're representing a partnership. But yeah, so I probably was a little bit wrong on that point. Thank you, Brad. But all the sellers that are on the deed need to sign. Somehow, so everybody that's on the deed, not necessarily the mortgage, but the deed. Okay. All right, so we're going to do, if there's any other questions, let me know, or we're going to take a little break here and get Scott set up. Scott, do you have a PowerPoint?
No, I do not. But I do. What I am going to do is share my screen, and I'm going to be using my OREF form to kind of point out some things that are on there that I think people should use.
All right, yeah. So you're ready to go, pretty much.
Yeah, pretty much. I just have to.
So this might be a 1 minute. Wow. All right.
Let's do it.
Okay, we're going into, for those who've just joined, we just did the basics of a real estate contract, which is just about 5 things, something you can write on a napkin, as they say. And now Scott's going to go into the nitty gritty, the stuff that will protect you, and that kind of stuff, should you want to be protected. Okay, makes it not so simple, but here we go. And Scott. So if you all have, like, you notice you can put your Zoom to speaker view, and you'll see Scott, because he's going to be showing some stuff. Instead of seeing everybody, you can just see the speaker, should you choose. All right, take it away, Scott.
Thank you, Grace. So this is my first time speaking to a group about stuff like this. Like Grace said, I am not a lawyer. I am a real estate broker. That is what we call ourselves in the state of Oregon. So I am going to be using, I'm going to pull up here in just a second, the OREF residential agreement. And then I'm going to use that because I can use it as a guide to what Oregon real estate has decided are good things to have in there, and kind of point out why to use them. So let's see if we can do this. Of course, it's causing me problems. Share screen. There we go. Okay. So first and foremost, this is called a residential sales agreement, and it's called an OREF form, and actually it's kind of redundant because it's an Oregon real estate form. So it's an Oregon real estate form. It's just what it's called. And one of the first things I will tell people is that I agree with Grace in that you don't always need to have a broker help you with something. I do believe that the newer you are into this, the more help I can be to you. Someone like Grace, who's done a bunch of work on her own, needs a little less help from me, but there's always going to be an opportunity that you're going to need some help. There are some very difficult things out there. I just finished a transaction with Angel where we had to get a conservator involved, and it took months. It took months, and it took a lot of hair pulling on everybody's side. So, so that's one of the reasons. It's one of the reasons why I think you can always use us to as excuse me. use this as a reference and stuff like that. So one of the first things I will tell you that I think everybody should do on their contracts if they're writing their own contracts is I am a strong believer in dates, and date everything. Date everything that you pass on to the other person, whether you're buying or selling. But the reason why dates are so good is that when you say I'm going to give my earnest money in 3 business days, well, 3 business days from what? So that first hard date should be on there. I think it should be on the top. I think that's one of the best things to protect you as you go, because then everything works off that agreement date. And so if it's January 1st, 2020, now when you say 10 days, it's 10 days from that date. The second thing about dates that I believe is very important in having in your contracts is use business days. I think business days protect people much better than calendar days. It does make it a little more tricky to count days, but if you, it means that you won't get stuck by not being able to do something because of a Sunday showing up. So if you are doing, once again, using the example of earnest money, if you say 3 business days and you sign the agreement on Friday, that gives you Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of next week. It doesn't mean Monday you have to rush to the bank and try to somehow get that earnest money over to the escrow company and stuff like that. Really, business days is a strong way of going through things. So I can't seem to pull up the chat. So if people do have questions.
Can I add something to that?
Absolutely, Daryl.
Date and timestamps can be very strategic when both writing and accepting offers.
Absolutely, because if you're putting out an offer and you say by the end of business day 5 p.m., that really sets up people that at 5:05 that's no longer an agreement that can be that you can have to agree to. So Daryl is right. Time is also a really good one to have on there.
And Scott, I got chat up. I'll let you know if there's anything.
Thanks, Grace.
Mhm.
So the next thing about earnest money is that 1% is pretty much the standard going here in Oregon. You can do more. You can do less if you can't quite afford 1%. If you're buying $1 million property, hopefully you have the $10,000 to put down, but not a lot of people do. So understand that the stronger you want to make your commitment, the stronger you should make your earnest money down. And that's about really all earnest money is to really make sure that it's there. Now, the other thing about earnest money is that if you do pull out of the agreement, this the earnest money will be could be up for grabs. What I'm going to try to tell you here is how to protect that earnest money. As a broker, and if I am your broker, my job is to protect your money. So that's how I'm going to present a lot of this stuff. The other thing, when you're looking at sales agreements, if you're buying a distressed property and it has a lot of stuff on the property, there was one property out there that had something like 50 cars and trucks and trailers on it. You want to have something said about that and who's going to take care of getting rid of it. If you are going to buy the property and keep that type of stuff out there, then you need to have that as a separate agreement, because your agreement is to buy the house and the land. Anything that's not a permanent fixture, a sink, central air, your furnace, things like that, you really want to make sure that's taken care of in a separate thing. So when Grace was talking about something that comes with 3 different addendums attached to it, depending on what the addendums, they actually can be good things, because it might be we have the property, and there are, there's personal property on it, and then there's junk property on it, and this is what's going to happen to those. So you can do it all in one, but some people might break it down. So really read addendums, read them back and forth. If something just doesn't seem right as you're reading it, go to anybody, and read it to them, because 2 brains will always work better and catch things. So that's my.
Can I add something?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Am I allowed to add as you go?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
easy with that.
In Oregon, if you write earnest money deposit, not earnest money, but earnest money deposit, it is refundable.
I'm not sure. I would have to ask.
You might check with a lawyer, but I'm telling you, I know that for a fact.
Yeah,
If you write money deposit and the deal goes south, the seller technically still has to sign off with the escrow. But if it comes push to shove, as long as you write deposit, so I usually write refundable earnest money deposit on my purchase agreements.
I'm sure.
I mean, I've closed a lot of real estate. And
Yeah, I know you have, Daryl, and I'm not going to contradict you on that. In what I know and what I've learned is that that's kind of what I'm talking about, is ways so you don't have to worry as much for that. But that's a good advice. If it's true, it's great to hear.
It is true. And then one other thing is, contrary to, and this, because you're a realtor, this will contradict you. But I typically write very minimal down payments. I don't give people big earnest monies to impress them up front. Typically, the way I strategize my transaction is it works pretty well, but I try to put as minimal money down on an earnest money purchase for the deposit for the purchase. I don't put these big monster down payments to impress people. I put the least amount, and my average amount is $1,000.
And Daryl, I've done $1,000 too. Yeah. And
Yeah, I mean, I don't
even,
pop $5,000, $10,000 that could get tied up in escrow for years.
and it's typical in Oregon to do 1%. Like I said earlier, we're not in Florida where all the gurus are and doing, $20 or $10. But yeah, so
I'm just giving you my opinion. I mean,
and also you work with the same escrow/title company probably as much as possible, and they are used to working with you, right?
I work with 3 companies, and it actually gives me really good credibility with the
Right.
buyer. Yeah, this guy can close.
Yeah, so it really depends on your team as well on that, guys, for everyone else that's listening. So, as you build rapport with your team, including your title escrow company, then the less likely they're going to say something for your lower earnest money deposit or down or whatever. I'll put it back to you, Scott.
Okay. So, what Daryl's saying, $1,000, that's great. I'm not going to contradict him. I would never suggest anybody just to say, if you're buying a really expensive property, I still believe in 1% or close to 1%. It depending on how you're buying properties, since we're in this type of situation, we're buying more properties that happen to be fix and flips, fix and holds, and stuff like that. $1,000 is going to go a long ways. He's correct. If you're buying your personal residence, and it's going to be a multiple offer deal, doing the 1% on a $300,000 house and putting $3,000 down is going to make you look a little stronger. It all depends on the situation. The situations that we're talking about here, most of the time I would tell most people $1,000 myself, just because we're only talking about homes that we're spending $100,000 on or $150,000 in order to flip them and make them into $200,000 or $300,000 houses. So that's I'll keep moving on. Going back to personal property. Like I said, when it comes to personal property is separate from real estate property. And if you are, I know a lot of people are looking at doing manufactured homes and fixing them up. This form that I have up on my screen right now does not work for that, because manufactured homes are personal property. They're actually titled through the DMV. So it's a little bit different form, and you're actually buying a personal property. If it's in a park, then you're also getting park rent. But even if it's on its own land, it does make a slight difference in how you approach things. So just so you know. But remember, just keep personal properties, hot tubs, trampolines, anything that can be picked up and moved, have it on something separate, or have something in your contracts that says, we are taking possession of this. It has this value or zero value. And what's one of the things is, if it is something, give it zero value. Because then if the person that you're purchasing the house from says, well, no, that has value. Okay, great. Well, then we got to do this over here. So any personal property, hot tubs are a big one, especially from where I come from, Minnesota. There tends to be a lot of them, and you want to keep them separate from your agreements. When it comes to financing, you don't really have to tell people a whole lot about how you're financing it, other than you're going to tell them that you're giving them cash, that you're getting a loan. You don't have to tell people where you're getting the loan. It can be from your great uncle Al, or it can be from Veristone. It doesn't matter. And you don't have to let them know where that's from. You just have to show that you have the ability to come up with the money. So when it comes to doing something about that, once again, let them know that you will have some sort of letter to them, something that will show them that you have the funds available, and that you will have that to them in X amount of business days. A great way to show how strong your bid is. Earnest money is one, but actually a better one is to have that verification of funds sent with your when you want to buy the property. Because all of a sudden you're saying, you know what, I'm gonna buy this property from you for $100,000. Here's a letter from my bank saying I have the ability to give you the $100,000. It's a much stronger way to present yourself than it is to put down $50,000 in as earnest money, and then, like Daryl said, could have that money tied up for something if the deal doesn't go through.
Can I ask something?
Yeah.
So, can I make a comment in regards to selling
Mm-hmm.
and the letter from the buyer? So something I always do is I always call the lender that's on the letter, because a lot of those letters are bogus and the people don't actually have the money to buy the property. And I make sure that that person has some kind of track record with the lender, or the lender can back it with, yeah, they've got good credit, they truly do have that money down, it's been verified. I always verify it before I accept an offer as a seller. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I'm going under the basic assumption that most people are going to do something like that, Daryl. My point is that if you are the seller and they're just handing you a contract, that contract doesn't mean anything. But if they have a verification of funds letter, so
You're talking about bank verification, or just
yes,
like
a bank verification letter
Or lender.
I mean, if
from
they
a
just
lender.
show me If they can show me they have the funds in a bank account, that to me is pretty solid. But a lender letter isn't solid. You can get online and print those. I make sure with the lender that these people can actually buy the property before I allow them to tie up my property for months. You know.
So I just want to interject here because we have some new people on and some less experienced. And for those of us that have been through the last recession, what Daryl is mentioning happened a lot, where when people were flippers were selling their new house, or wholesalers were selling, a lot of people were faking the lender letter and trying to prove that they had funds when they didn't even intend on closing. They might have had 7 offers out there on 7 different properties, and they were just waiting for one to be the best one. And this was very common during the recession as it turned around, and we're looking at that kind of future again. An important part of networking in this RIA is because if we sell to each other, we pretty much know who can close. So
Yeah, that's thank you, Grace. That's exactly what I was trying to explain. And
yeah,
you know, a lot of people wholesale. They teach them in the wholesale schools or online. Just throw a letter, throw an offer to a realtor, tie up the property, and then try to wholesale it to someone else. I make sure that they actually can fund the property.
exactly.
So, anyway.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people burned a few years back on that kind of thing. So true. Yeah.
True. Okay. Thanks.
I think in anything that you're doing, especially when you're getting some sort of agreement or a contract, if you are not verifying things, then you are, or if you have a realtor, we always verify things. A lot of us, like I work for Berkshire, I hand over stuff to the office, and we have office staff that actually goes through all that, and make sure that things are what they're supposed to be. So, you know, if you get a fake letter, you do have to do your due diligence. And anything and everything that I talk about here, there is always a due diligence that you need to do. If you want to be successful, you have to do due diligence. You have to go and make sure things are on the up and up. But so with everything else that I say from here, just remember that due diligence is something that you have to do. That's just common sense. If you are getting a loan, or if you are buying a property and you are getting a loan, and you have some sort of something that needs to happen. Let's say you're selling another property before you can buy this property. That tends to be a big one. You should have, to protect yourself in your contract for buying the next property, you should have some reference to that, so that if your deal falls through, you have some sort of way of getting out of the deal that you're in. And so find type of financing contingencies, saying, like I said, if you have a verification letter, a real verification letter that says you already have the funds, that's great. If you are buying the property after you sell a property, the idea of putting in a contingency in your contract saying, as soon as this property is funded, then I can, because closing and funding are two different things. You will go in and sign paperwork depending on what time of the day it is. So either if you do it in the morning, later that day. If you do it in the afternoon, it can be the next morning. Everything will get recorded for the property, and that's when funding happens, and that's when you'll see your money. So just as soon as you put a signature to an ink to paper, doesn't necessarily that you'll be handed a check right at that moment. Now, in cash deals and in some certain situations, it will work that way, but as a general rule, things have to be registered, and then escrow will let go. The escrow companies will let go of the funds and give you your money. So, but protect yourself with how you're getting the money. Make sure I'm a strong believer in, and like I said, if the money's coming from another property, something like that, put that in there so that if that falls apart, you can use that as your escape clause to get out of and getting your earnest money back. Because 9 times out of 10, if the other deal falls apart, it isn't because you weren't doing everything right. It's usually because something happened with the other party on that, and you shouldn't let that affect you negatively on what you're going to on the next one. So the other thing, like I said, is if you do everything in business days, there are certain things that a seller should be able to get to you, and you should try to make them as quick as possible that you can. And don't be afraid to say, that I'll have my earnest money to you in 3 business days. I will have all the necessary documents for closing or available to the escrow company by X amount of days, depending on how many days you're putting in the contract. If you're doing it in 30 days, 45 days, whatever it is, don't be afraid to put numbers in there. One of the other things that I'm sure everybody's seen, because the year's 2020, when you write dates, when you write the year, write 2020 right now, because then somebody could, I don't know why, but they could figure out a way to cheat you out of something by writing a 19 after that or an 18 after that. And now that they've changed the date. So another thing to protect yourself on the date is 4/14/2020. If you have any provisions now, a lot of people here like to, and I think it's a great way you get owner carry and things like that. Any type of funds that you're going to get from the other side, whether, like I said, it's going to be an owner carry, they're going to pay all the closing costs, anything like that. Once again, I believe that should be, you should have that in the contract that they sign, so that everybody has the knowledge of what's going on. Because if that's not something, it's something that you talked about, but then you didn't put it in the contract, and then it comes down to closing, and they verbally said, sure, I'll pay $8,000 in closing, and it's not in your contract. Come to closing, what do you have? Your word against theirs. Gerald does a lot of business, like he said. Daryl, I'm just using Daryl because he's does a lot of business, and I'm going to pick on him just because his name is on my screen. That's why I'm picking on him. Him and I come into a verbal agreement, but when we sit down at the table, if I didn't have it in writing, he's not going to be responsible for that money. I'm going to be responsible for that money. And so he would have every right to say, no, I'm not paying it. Am I not correct, Daryl?
Depends on your relationship.
Sure, it does. Sure.
And the amount of profit you expect to receive via the transaction. But I've had many deals where we've changed
things at the last minute.
Change things to benefit the seller because it just, like property we closed this summer, the seller had a IRS lien, that even they weren't aware of.
Yeah.
That threw the whole transaction off by 10 grand. So they couldn't afford to pay it. So clearly we had to eat the 10 grand.
Yeah, absolutely. But like I was saying, at the beginning, you don't know me at all, let's say.
Right.
I am Joe Smith walking up to you, and I'm going to buy a property from you, and you and I talk about, hey, I'd like you to cover some of the closing costs, and then I hand you a contract that doesn't say anything about the closing costs. When we get to the table and I go, hey, where's that $8,000 for closing costs? You're going to say, it's not in the contract. And
yeah, my contracts clarify
right.
it, but
exactly.
Yeah,
so and like I said, I'm trying to point out things that
no, actually it's a great one. Can I add something? Septic
Sure.
tanks? So I primarily acquire properties on acreage. For those of you that are listening, you know, properties that need work, and then most of them have septic issues or well issues or no well or no septic. But if they have a septic tank, when you write your offer for the inspection, have the seller pay for the pumping of the septic tank. You pay the inspection, they pay the pumping. It'll save you $500 per property.
Actually, when I was going to that was actually something I was going to say also. Is that when you're having that inspected, that you should always get them to pump it, because
Yeah,
absolutely. It
Yeah.
saves, well, not only does it save you the $500 for that, but if there is something wrong, it makes it a little easier to, from my understanding, it makes it easier to figure out if there is something wrong, if you have an empty tank. So, so that was actually the next thing I was going to get into is professional inspections. I know most of us are buying distressed properties. I am still a strong believer in writing in there that you're going to have things inspected, whether you do it or not. You should at least still have it in there to give you the option. And the other thing that I strongly believe is that sometimes it's hard to get inspections lined up. Right now, when it's a little slower, like right now, because of what's going on, not so much. But when things are really busy, it can be. And a great trick is when you're talking about inspections is, and I learned this one from actually a principal broker, is to say, give yourself 11 days, 11 business days. Because what that ends up doing is if it's a Monday, you get 2 weekends and it's that third Monday out before you have to have any information back to the seller if you're the buyer. And what that really allows you to do is if you can get an inspection on a Saturday, or things are getting hard to line up, when that Friday comes, and let's say they're 2 weeks out and it's going to be a Friday, it gives you time over that weekend to go through that all your inspections that you've had done to find out what you need to, if you need to ask for anything to be changed or fixed or however. Now, like I said, most of us are buying properties that are distressed. So when you're looking at that, as an example, I told Grace earlier today, you know, the roof has tarps on it. We know we're going to be replacing the roof, but more importantly is septics and sewer lines, and have them inspected. Sewer lines can be crushed, and if that main sewer line going out to the streets crushed and is not flowing properly, all of a sudden you have a big mess and you've just bought yourself a property that has a $10,000 problem that's hidden. And that after you buy it, all of a sudden you're going to figure out that sewer line's not working properly. You got to have somebody dig it up and have it properly fixed. It's $10,000. And that's $10,000 of money that you thought was going to be profit that just walked out the door. For a few $100s to still have properties inspected is invaluable. You can find out things that can be really expensive in walking the property. So if you're buying a property that's a little bit older and they used to heat with oil and that oil tank is still underground and is rusting away, and your inspector going through the history of the property, and now all of a sudden you find out that that oil tank is still underneath there. Does anybody really want to have a rusting oil tank that some kid's walking across your lawn, or your friend's kid is out there playing in the yard, or your kid, and that tank gives way and now they get hurt? Your professional inspections are going to save you a lot of money and a lot of headaches later on. Sewer lines, like Daryl was talking about, having septic tanks inspected and having them pumped out so that they're, as you take over the property, you have a fresh, well, not necessarily a fresh tank, but you have a clean tank that's ready to go, that when you're done flipping the property, or if you're renting it out, that you know that what's going on with that, and what kind of shape it's in. Because not expecting a septic tank, and you have to replace your septic, once again, you're talking $10,000-$15,000. And so things like this are paramount to being put in. I think your inspections like this is probably the of anything else that I talk about. Inspections of the property, and knowing what you're getting into, and finding out some of the hidden things, because there's always going to be something that's missed, and that could, and I'm not saying that, but the more you protect yourself, the better. And if you find out that it has an oil, like I said, the oil tank that's still underground rusting away, it's very expensive to take out. And once you find that out, now you can write an addendum saying that the property owner has to take that out, or you can come to some sort of agreement. If maybe it's taking it off the price of the property. There's a lot of different things that you can do by having inspections. And like I said, you don't want to get crazy with the amount of time that you leave for inspections, but you do want to give yourself at least 10 days. I like the idea of 11 to get to give you that type of stuff.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
What if you've got to close the property in 10 days or 7 days? How do you get an inspector out there on really short notice?
There are inspectors out there that can get out there in 2 or 3 days. I had one, and that was promising 48 hours that he would be out there. And he was fairly new, and I used him a couple of times, and he missed a couple of pretty big obvious things. So I'm no longer using him, but there are other inspectors out there. I'm sure you might.
Well, I was just going to give a suggestion to the new investors in the group is you can get inspectors out on really short notice if you pay more. So like if they charge $500 for an inspection and you say, hey, if you can get it done in the next 48 hours, I'll give you $750. I guarantee you all of a sudden they're
Sure, you're at the front of the list.
Yep. The other thing is, and I can tell you this on 2 properties that I've purchased in the last 45 days, don't ever let your buyer's agent refer you your inspector. Find your inspector yourself.
Correct.
In those scenarios, the inspector overlooked things, and I'm positive it had to do with my buyer's agent that I was previously using. Because they want the deal to go through because they get paid and all that. So remember that when you're doing these deals, that there's a lot of money involved, and there's a lot of people that get commissions out of this money. So make sure you do your due diligence and that you use good people.
Yeah, absolutely. With belonging to a group like RIA here, you can call and ask Grace. You can call and ask Daryl. You can call and ask me, Angel. There's a lot of us that have names of people that we like and that we've had good business with. And there are people that we haven't, and we can say, oh, you're going to use Joe Smith. I've seen his work. It's not the best. And so I think
Dan's face.
Yeah. So, yeah, always ask. If you're newer, ask for referrals for inspectors. Ask, because you're going to find that people who have been doing this for a while are going to know really good people.
Yeah, and then one other thing is if you're the seller and your buyer wants to know of an inspector, or you had it previously inspected and they want to see your inspection. Sorry, I'm tired. Don't do that, because it sets you up for liability. The buyer needs to come up with their own inspector and have it inspected separately. Otherwise, you can skew the buyer's impression of a property, which puts you in an arena of potential liability. So it's better to have the buyer. So for example, the house that I've got under contract to be sold right now, the buyers want me, they wanted to inspect my inspection, or see my inspection, and they wanted me to refer them. And I told them straight up, that's really bad. You really need to find your own inspector, because it's conflict of interest as a seller. Even though I would give them full disclosure, somebody else may not. They may hide things. So it's better to find an independent inspector. I'm just telling you my opinion on that.
Absolutely. But on the flip side of that, if you're the seller and your buyer comes in and they have an inspection done, you can ask to see that inspection. And the good thing about asking to see that inspection is if the deal does fall through, you can see that inspection and go, you know what, I can do a little bit here, a little bit there. Maybe it's gonna cost me a couple $100. Maybe I can do it for free because I'm handy, and I can make something that might be an issue for somebody else go away. So I think it's good to ask as a seller to ask to see the buyer's inspection. They might not give it to you, but at least to ask. But like Daryl said, the other way around, then you're putting yourself in a situation that's like why Grace and I both said at the beginning, we're not lawyers. Daryl is not an inspector. He shouldn't give an inspection that he's had done to somebody else, because it puts him in a situation where he's acting or trying to act like an expert, and it's a bad business practice. Or you can say no. All right, so the last thing that I really want to touch on is something that a lot of people probably don't know, is that as a seller, you do have to give there's a form that you fill out to show that what you know about the property that you're selling. And if you don't know anything about it, you say you don't know on the disclosure. It's called a seller's disclosure. But if you do know things like there's a vermin problem, or the septic is bad, because we've used that a lot, you have to disclose that. And I would always put in there that everything is subject to, you can word it however you want to, but that this deal is subject to a seller disclosure. By law, they have to give it 5 days. And one of the things I would do if I was a buyer, and that I suggest in some situations, is that you don't pester the seller for it. You ask for it once or twice. If they don't give it to you, it's something that you can use as a get out of the contract, all the way up to closing, because they have to give it to you. Like I said, even if they know nothing about the property, it's somebody that's wholesaling a property. They own it, they're wholesaling it, they're just trying to flip it over really fast. They still have to say, I don't know anything about this property that I'm wholesaling it. Because if they do know something about the property and they don't disclose it, then you can come back as a buyer and go after the seller. So I would ask for it. I'd ask for it a couple of times. I would always put it in the contract that you want that, and I would point it out that it's in the contract. But then stress properties, I think you kind of leave that alone then after that.